So I am finally going to remake this video. I've wanted to remake it since relaunching my channel, I guess, and I am finally able to get around to it. So a few years ago, I took a history and theory of architecture class, and in that class we got to write a paper about whatever we wanted within the realm of like buildings and architecture, obviously. I, of course, chose Gothic architecture, specifically Neo-Gothic architecture, and how that connected to the Gothic novel genre, of course. And yeah, my professor loved it so much. She emailed me later and asked me if she could use it as an example. I ended up getting an A+. I've never gotten an A+ on anything before in college, may I say, with the exception of a few things in my vampire class. Anyways, my professor can back me up on how, I don't know, on my credibility with this, I suppose. Okay, so throughout the video, I will be referencing the paper that I wrote. If you're interested in reading it yourself, like word for word, then I don't know, I could send it to you or whatever, but yes, so I will be referencing that. And I'm listening to music too during this just because it helps me think. So in this video, I'm basically going to talk about how 19th century Neo-Gothic architecture influenced the Gothic novel genre in 19th century American culture. Because, or due to the Romantic movement and the Enlightenment. Those two movements were like huge when it comes to linking all of this together. So yes, because of its association with those two movements, because, I'm just going to read what I wrote, it's easier, because of the personification of the ideas of freedom of expression, introspectiveness, and non-conformism, and because of its mysterious and imposing mood, obviously. And it was this ideological and social shift in ideas that really gave birth to the Gothic novel. In my paper, I did go through a few definitions just for the sake of clarity so that there wasn't any confusion or connotations, external connotations coming into this, so I'm going to explain exactly what I mean by certain things. So, 19th century Neo-Gothic architecture means the architecture that resulted from the Gothic revival, which took place in the mid-1800s in England and then spread to America. There is a difference between the English Gothic revival and the American Gothic revival. I will explain that later because it involves American assimilation. Also, there is a difference between the British Gothic novel and the American Gothic novel. In this particular essay, I am talking about the American Gothic novel. There are differences and similarities between each, of course, but since this focuses on 19th century America, the Gothic revival there and such, and the various movements, I will be mainly referring to the American Gothic novel unless otherwise stated. The Romantic movement, as defined by Peckham, I will link, by the way, I will link all of my sources and references and all of that, or not link I suppose, but list them all below if you want to double check the people that I quote and whatnot. I will put that all in the description box for those of you intellectuals who are curious. Okay, so Peckham defines Romanticism as a specific historical movement in art and ideas which occurred in Europe and America in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. We will obviously be focusing on the movement in America. Kilgore, Maggie Kilgore, if you don't know her, get on it. She thought that the Romantic movement was defined as that which saw the fundamental values of the Enlightenment, which were reason, science, and scholarship, as very domineering and suppressive to human emotion and imagination. So already you can see the tension between the Enlightenment and the Romantic movement. You can see where this is going. The Enlightenment, obviously, as defined by Jonathan I. Israel, was a movement towards the secular, combining immense reverence for science and for mathematical logic with some form of non-providential deism, if not outright materialism and atheism. So, there you go. So, ideas traveled between Europe and America because of the mercantile link between the two, obviously, like shipments of goods and food and whatever else, you know. So ideas traveled that way, and the ideas from the European Enlightenment moved to America, and of course Americans took it and made it their own thing, and it became the American Enlightenment. In my paper, I say that this transformation is best described by Ferguson and is in fact the reason for the birth of Romanticism in the United States. So thank you, European Enlightenment. So the American Enlightenment was about freedom of knowledge and the liberation of reason, scholarship, and science, brought to the ability of the human mind to become more intellectual, to transcend the work against its carnal ways. So basically, the Enlightenment was all about freedom to be smart, pretty much. Like, you're more than just your carnal, emotional humanness. Ferguson says, in essence, the Enlightenment begins in the hope of freedom, it ends in theories of repression. So although it was there, they did try to like, yeah, humans are awesome, we're smart, freedom to think and be smart and learn things and know things, that's when the Romantics came about. So basically you have the Enlightenment thinkers who believed that your inner nature should be suppressed, that it's far too emotional and carnal to be of any benefit to you, and that it in fact hindered your intellectual growth and the potential of the human mind, whereas the Romantics thought that what was inside was actually very beautiful, and that it was the only way to actually discover yourself and learn who you actually are, and that it's not bad to be passionate, whereas these ones thought that it totally was, and that you should actually have a reverence for the rational, and only the rational and logical will get you through life and help you grow and such. In my paper, I wrote, thus we have so far a strong reverence for all things rational, a passion for knowledge, and the repression of the carnal on one side, and on the other we have a reverence for all things imaginative, a passion for emotion, and the repression of the arrogance of scholarship. So the arrival of the English Gothic revival to America, we have a bishop by the name of Dwayne to thank for that. So thank you, Bishop Dwayne. So we have the English Gothic revival came over to America, and it became its own American Gothic revival. Stanton specifically says that this was a process of interpretation and assimilation wherein the wish to copy Gothic architecture was singularly expressive of the respect and nostalgia for the past, which were characteristic of the 19th century. So already you're getting in touch with that emotion that you see with Romantics. In James F. White's opinion, the Gothic revival was catalytically driven by Romanticism's literature. This makes sense if we consider the nature of the Romantic movement and the American Gothic revival. Both involve a certain reverence for the repressed and no longer living, the past, and the literature of the Romantic movement often involved such. Based on what I've read from Stanton's work, while the English Gothic revival tended towards the English Church of the Dark Ages, the American Gothic revival, while still involving such a preference, had more of a touch of rebellion, being a country where modernism, future thinking, and the pursuit of knowledge were on the high rise, which the Romantics thought of as the suppression of human nature. The American Gothic revival represented a rehumanization of the United States. Maggie Kilgore. If you guys don't have this book or have never read it, you need to go get it like right now, because this was amazing. It's amazing. The Rise of the Gothic novel by Maggie Kilgore, okay? Like, Y'all need this in your life. Anyways, she believes that the genre, that is the American Gothic novel, reflects some repressed aspects of human nature, served as a release for the subconscious mind, and became imagination's rebellion against reason. Again, Romanticism versus Enlightenment. So basically, the Gothic novel was a literary reaction to the Enlightenment, and it carried with it some romantic values, which were partly, according to Kilgore, an interest in the bizarre, eccentric, wild, savage, lawless, and transgressive, in originality and the imagination. So the Neo-Gothic architecture that resulted from the American Gothic revival came to represent, for all of these romantics and Gothic novelists, non-conformism, in the sense that it opposed the common and widespread Enlightenment values. There's also, more metaphorically speaking, connections between Neo-Gothic architecture and the American Gothic novel in terms of, architectural style. Hume defines the genre as a style characterized by haunted castles, supernatural occurrences, secret panels and stairways, time-yellowed manuscripts, and poorly lighted midnight scenes. I love it. Whereas, so you have that bit, right, in the Gothic novel, American Gothic novel. So over here in Gothic architecture, as interpreted from reading Ingersoll and Kostoff, which again I will put in the description box for you guys, Gothic architecture engaged by Christians was partly meant to impose onto its inhabitants the power of God, to instill in them a feeling of mystery and insignificance. This attempt at embodying metaphysical ideas carried over to the American Gothic revival. You can see this in NYC's Trinity Church, built in the 1840s. With the church's tall, foreboding nature, its dark, worn stone, and decorative pointed steeple, you don't really need an explanation as to see how such architectural style inspired and became a part of the definition of the Gothic novel, especially during a time when consideration of the metaphysical was quickly on the rise. It came as no surprise that curiosity about the supernatural weaved its way into the imaginative realm of the American Gothic novel. Just as this Neo-Gothic architecture forced its inhabitants, or the people who entered it, whatever building that may be, to feel something, it encouraged the sublime, so did the American Gothic novel, where it forced its readers to actually feel something, whereas the Enlightenment was like, no. Basically, the American Gothic novel encouraged feeling, thanks to Romanticism, in opposition to the Enlightenment, which told everyone to just forget about your feelings. That's not important. It's hindering you from being smart. Kilgore says the Gothic has been defined in terms of this peculiar and palpable effect upon its audience. Counterargument is Watt's opinion that the genre's emergence was coincident with the revival of imagination in an era that privileged rationality. To say that the genre's emergence was coincidental with the emergence of Romanticism would be to disregard the effects that the previously mentioned movements and revivals had on the evolution of American society and literature. To do that would be to deny a part of American history and the nature of those movements. Granted, the American Gothic novel genre was affected by the British Gothic novel as well as the Enlightenment Romantic movement and the Gothic revival. It is still difficult to understand how something which was affected so significantly by certain movements could only be coincidental. So, there you go, Watt. So, basically, you have the English, European, whatever, Enlightenment movement came over, came over to America, and Americans were like, hey, American Enlightenment movement, or American Enlightenment. And then you have people like romantics are like, whoa, you can't tell us not to feel, you can't tell us not to love the sublime. So romantics came about simultaneously. You have the European Gothic revival coming over to America and becoming the American Gothic revival. So you have American Gothic revival and Romanticism, mother and dad, boom, the Gothic novel. It was the similarity in ideas, it was the nostalgia and the passion, the reverence and sublime together, those common ideas, architecture and ideology coming together and creating this beautiful literary genre as a response. It's just amazing. So, in conclusion, in my paper, I wrote, the genre was one symptom of a widespread shift away from neoclassical ideals of order and reason toward romantic belief in emotion and imagination. That's quoting Hume right there. 19th century Neo-Gothic architecture is found in the pages of many subsequent Gothic novels and has been accepted as part of the genre's definition, having been such a huge inspiration for it. This style of architecture was the embodiment of the values of the ideological movement that swept through America, of freedom of expression, of rebellion against the limitations and constraints of the normal, and of the overpowering desire to explore the realm of the mysterious and metaphysical. The American Gothic novel was a product of that drastic influence. So that is it for this. I loved making that. It was amazing. Can definitely feel a lot about this topic. If you guys have any further questions or anything like that, feel free to ask them. And I guess I will see you. If you have any more video requests or anything like that, just let me know. And I guess I will see you guys when I see you next. Bye.